Walk into a primary school in Malaysia on any given morning, and you might be standing in one of 4 entirely different education systems, teaching the exact same government curriculum in 4 different languages, often within a few streets of each other. One school runs entirely in Malay, another runs in Mandarin, a third in Tamil. A fourth, for a smaller number of families, blends Malay with Islamic religious instruction. All of them answer to the same Ministry of Education. All of them produce citizens of the same country. And this arrangement isn't a modern experiment in multicultural tolerance. It's been running, in roughly this form, for well over a century. Most nations, when faced with multiple ethnic communities living inside the same borders, eventually choose a direction. Assimilate everyone into one dominant culture, or let communities drift into separate, largely disconnected enclaves. Malaysia did neither. It built a country where 3 entirely distinct civilizational inheritances, Malay, Chinese, and Indian, operate in close, constant, often loud proximity, without collapsing into each other and without fully separating either. 2 of Asia's biggest construction firms once literally raced each other floor by floor to build the twin halves of the same skyscraper. A 600-year-old hybrid culture, born from a single royal marriage, still cooks meals nobody else on Earth cooks quite the same way. And underneath all of it sits a rainforest so old, it was already ancient when the Amazon hadn't yet finished forming. This is the story of what it actually takes to hold 3 civilizations together in one country, without ever quite letting them become one thing. Start with the schools, because nowhere else does Malaysia's core arrangement, coexistence without merger, show up more clearly or more controversially than in how the country decided to educate its own children. The roots of this system trace back to British colonial rule, when Chinese and Indian immigrant communities, arriving in large numbers through the 19th and early 20th centuries to work in tin mines and rubber plantations, began establishing their own schools rather than relying on colonial institutions that offered them little. Chinese medium schools, teaching in Mandarin, and Tamil medium schools, serving the growing Indian community, developed largely independently of the Malay medium and English medium schools that already existed. By the time Malaysia gained independence in 1957, the new government faced an obvious dilemma: fold everything into a single national language system in the name of unity, or preserve the separate vernacular schools each community had already built for itself. The compromise, formalized through a series of education reports culminating in the Razak Report of 1956, split the difference in a way surprisingly few countries have ever attempted at this scale. Malay became the primary national language and the required medium of instruction in national schools. But Chinese medium and Tamil medium vernacular schools were preserved as a fully funded, parallel part of the same public education system. Not private alternatives operating on the margins, but government schools following the same national curriculum, simply delivered in a different language, with Malay and English still taught as compulsory subjects inside them. Today, this means a Malaysian child's very first classroom experience depends heavily on which of these systems their parents choose, and that choice still shapes, to some degree, which language a person thinks most naturally in as an adult, and which specific slice of the country's multicultural life they grow up closest to. The arrangement has never been free of tension. Critics have argued for decades that separate school systems, however well-funded and well-intentioned, risk deepening the very ethnic divisions independence-era leaders hoped a shared national identity would eventually dissolve. Malaysian politicians still debate the vernacular school question with real intensity, and the balance between preserving cultural and linguistic heritage against building a fully unified national identity remains honestly unresolved. But the system has also proven remarkably durable, precisely because it doesn't force an impossible choice on families. A Malaysian child can walk out of a Tamil medium primary school fluent in Tamil, Malay, and English simultaneously, carrying 3 linguistic inheritances at once, rather than trading 2 of them away for the third. It's a messy, imperfect solution to a genuinely difficult problem. But it's also, quietly, one of the most literal expressions on Earth of a country choosing to let its constituent cultures run in parallel rather than demanding they merge. There's exactly one place in Malaysia's history where that parallel arrangement broke down completely, on purpose, and the result became one of the most distinctive cultures in Southeast Asia. In 1459, according to Malaccan court tradition, a Chinese princess named Hang Li Po arrived in the trading port of Malacca and married the ruling sultan, Sultan Mansur Shah, cementing a diplomatic alliance between the Malaccan Sultanate and Ming China. Her entourage settled in Malacca alongside her, and in the centuries that followed, waves of Chinese traders, overwhelmingly men, arriving without wives, continued settling in this same strategic port city, marrying local Malay women in the absence of Chinese brides. Their descendants developed into a genuinely new community, neither fully Chinese nor fully Malay. The Peranakans, known locally as Baba for the men and Nyonya for the women, a people who kept Chinese ancestral customs, clan structures, and religious practices, while adopting Malay language, cuisine, clothing, and daily social customs almost wholesale. What emerged over roughly 6 centuries wasn't a compromise between 2 cultures. It was a genuine third thing. Peranakan cuisine blends Chinese cooking techniques, wok frying, braising, the use of soy-based ingredients, with the herbs, chilies, and coconut-based sauces that define Malay cooking, producing dishes that exist nowhere in China and nowhere in traditional Malay kitchens either, only in the specific fusion the Peranakan community spent centuries developing. Nyonya women became famous for elaborate beadwork and embroidery, developing decorative traditions found in no other Chinese diaspora community anywhere in the world. The community developed its own hybrid language, Baba Malay, blending Malay grammar with Hokkien vocabulary, and its own performance tradition, a sung poetic dueling form called Dondang Sayang, practiced not just by Peranakans but shared across Malacca's Malay, Portuguese Eurasian, and Indian communities alike. UNESCO recognized the tradition as intangible cultural heritage in 2018, specifically citing how thoroughly it crosses ethnic lines rather than belonging to any single one. The Peranakans matter to this story not because they represent everyone in Malaysia. They were always a specific, relatively small community, concentrated historically in the Strait settlements of Malacca, Penang, and Singapore. They matter because they're proof of what happens on the rare occasions when Malaysia's parallel cultures actually do fuse into something new, rather than running alongside each other. It happened once, dramatically, over 600 years, starting with a single royal marriage. It didn't become the template for the whole country. Instead, it became a permanent, specific exception, a genuine hybrid culture sitting inside a country whose more common pattern is coexistence rather than fusion. That same instinct, let each side keep its own identity but put them in direct, visible competition and cooperation at once, shows up again, in a completely different, far more modern form. In the skyline of the country's own capital. By the early 1990s, Malaysia's government, under Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, had set an audacious goal: build the tallest building in the world on a former racetrack site in central Kuala Lumpur, and do it in roughly 6 years, a timeline that would ordinarily require closer to 8 for a project of this scale. To hit that deadline, planners made an unusual decision. Rather than awarding the entire construction contract to a single firm, they split the project in 2. A Japanese consortium led by the Hazama Corporation would build Tower 1, the West Tower, while a South Korean consortium led by Samsung Engineering and Construction would build Tower 2, the East Tower, along with the sky bridge connecting them. Officially, this was framed purely as a scheduling strategy. Two teams working simultaneously would finish faster than one team working sequentially. Unofficially, everyone involved understood exactly what they'd just created. Once the cranes went up, the competition became impossible to ignore, even without anyone formally acknowledging it existed. Engineers on each site could look directly across the construction lot and measure the other team's progress every single morning. The Korean consortium, despite starting roughly a month later than the Japanese team, and carrying the additional burden of building the connecting skybridge, pushed to close the gap. According to persistent site legend, repeated by construction veterans more as a matter of pride than documented fact, the two towers' distinctive pinnacles, enormous 60-meter steel structures each manufactured off-site and craned into place, were originally meant to be raised simultaneously for maximum public spectacle. One team, the story goes, secretly pre-assembled their entire pinnacle out of view, specifically to be ready to install it the instant conditions allowed, determined not to be beaten to the milestone. When the towers were finally completed in 1996, opening fully in 1999, they briefly held the title of tallest buildings on Earth. Two structures, designed by a single architect to be visually identical, built in parallel by two different East Asian nations racing each other the entire way, then locked together forever by a sky bridge whose real engineering purpose is to let both towers sway safely in the wind without ever losing their balance relative to each other. It's difficult to imagine a more literal architectural metaphor for how this country actually functions. Two distinct teams from two distinct cultures building toward the exact same skyline at the exact same time, neither one absorbed into the other, connected by a structure specifically engineered to keep them stable precisely because they're moving independently rather than as one. Step back far enough from the schools, the 600-year-old fusion cuisine, and the competing construction crews, and there's a landscape underneath all of it that renders the entire human timeline of this story almost irrelevant by comparison. Taman Negara, the national park spanning Malaysia's Pahang, Kelantan, and Terengganu states, protects a stretch of lowland tropical rainforest that Malaysian park authorities and multiple independent researchers estimate to be roughly 130 million years old. A rainforest that, by that estimate, was already a mature, established ecosystem, tens of millions of years before the Amazon rainforest had even begun to take its current form, roughly 55 million years ago. Some competing claims exist. Australia's Daintree rainforest is estimated by some researchers to be comparably old or potentially older. But by nearly every reputable account, Taman Negara ranks among the small handful of oldest continuously surviving tropical rainforest ecosystems anywhere on the planet, having endured, largely undisturbed, through ice ages and geological upheavals that reshaped or destroyed comparable forests elsewhere in the world. What survived inside that ancient canopy is its own kind of quiet argument for coexistence. Malayan tigers, Asian elephants, and Sumatran rhinoceros, among the rarest large mammals left on Earth, share this forest with more than 10,000 recorded plant species and over 600 bird species, an extraordinary density of biodiversity sustained specifically because this particular patch of Southeast Asia escaped the worst climatic disruptions that periodically wiped out or fragmented forests elsewhere on the planet. The Orang Asli, the indigenous peoples of peninsular Malaysia who lived in and around this rainforest long before Malay, Chinese, or Indian communities ever arrived on these shores, still maintain traditional knowledge and, in some communities, traditional ways of life within and near its boundaries. The oldest human layer in a country whose more recent history gets told, almost exclusively, through the more recent arrivals who followed them. There's something worth sitting with in the fact that a country this actively, visibly engaged in negotiating three separate civilizational identities in real time sits on top of a forest floor that has quietly existed, unbothered by any of it, for 130 million years. Every human system in this story, the parallel school languages, the fused Peranakan cuisine, the competing construction crews, is a comparatively recent, ongoing experiment in how different groups of people share space without erasing each other. The rainforest underneath all of it was simply here first, indifferent to whichever answer the humans eventually settle on. Put these four stories next to each other, and a specific, consistent logic starts to emerge about how this country actually operates, beneath the more general language of multiculturalism that gets applied to it from the outside. Malaysia doesn't force its constituent cultures to dissolve into a single blended identity the way a melting pot model would. It also doesn't let them retreat into fully separate, non-interacting spheres the way a strict segregation model would. Instead, it builds specific, structured points of contact. A shared national curriculum delivered in different languages, a national skyline built by two nations working side by side, a UNESCO-recognized art form deliberately shared across ethnic lines rather than owned by one, while otherwise allowing each community to maintain its own distinct traditions, languages, and identities largely intact. It's neither full fusion nor full separation. It's something closer to permanent, structured proximity, different enough to stay distinct, close enough to be genuinely, continuously shaped by each other. That's a harder balance to maintain than either of the more common alternatives, and Malaysia doesn't always get it right. The ongoing debates over vernacular schools, over economic policy, over what national identity should ultimately mean, are proof that this isn't a solved problem so much as a continuously managed one. But it's also, evidently, a durable one. The vernacular school system has survived nearly 70 years of independence and repeated political pressure to consolidate it. The Peranakan community, though small, has preserved a genuinely unique 600-year-old identity rather than dissolving fully into either of its parent cultures. And the country's most iconic modern landmark is, quite literally, held together by an engineering solution built specifically to let two different builders' work move independently without ever coming apart. There's a specific kind of discipline running underneath everything in this story. And it isn't the dramatic, flag-waving kind of national unity most countries reach for. It's a Tamil medium school teaching the same national curriculum as the Malay medium school 3 streets over. It's a Nanya kitchen, still cooking a dish that belongs to no single ancestry 600 years after the marriage that created it. It's a sky bridge engineered to let two towers sway independently without ever losing their balance relative to each other. None of it is about becoming the same. All of it is about staying close enough and different enough at the same time. So here's the question worth carrying with you after this ends. What would change about the place you call home if it stopped trying to blend its differences into one thing, and instead simply learned to build the connective structure that lets those differences stand permanently side by side? This documentary draws on verified historical, cultural, architectural, and scientific reporting about real places, communities, and events in Malaysia. No fictional characters have been introduced. All named individuals, institutions, and events are drawn from documented sources.